America loves a good attraction. The bigger, the flashier, the more overpriced, the better. But every now and then, a place outlives its purpose, or reveals it never really had one. Today, we're counting down 10 attractions in America that really should close right now. Number 10. SeaQuest Interactive Aquariums. Let's start with one that is already halfway there. SeaQuest built its brand on a simple promise. Let paying customers touch wild animals in shopping malls. Otters, sloths, wallabies, stingrays, coaties, kinkajous, all crammed into windowless, mall-adjacent enclosures so that guests could pet them for the price of a theme park ticket. What could possibly go wrong? Quite a lot, it turns out. Between 2019 and 2024, the U.S. Department of Agriculture cited SeaQuest locations for over 110 violations of the Federal Animal Welfare Act. That number includes 12 critical citations, meaning violations with serious or severe adverse effects on animal health and well-being, 25 citations for unsafe or inhumane handling, 22 for enclosures in disrepair, and 24 for filthy, infested, or cluttered conditions. An undercover investigation by the Humane Society of the United States at the Fort Worth and Las Vegas locations in summer 2024 found roach and maggot infestations near animals and their food. Animals kept without access to light or fresh air, and dangerous human-animal contact happening daily. The USDA fined SeaQuest $4,500 in December 2022 for multiple violations, including incidents where guests were bitten by otters, coatis, and a kinkajou. A flying squirrel died after a door was closed on the animal at the New Jersey location. A parakeet was caught in a door and died at the Folsom, California location. A wallaby made contact with a child's face in Las Vegas. The chain once had 10 locations. SeaQuest eventually filed for bankruptcy. Several locations have since closed, including Fort Worth in October 2024 and the Minnesota location in early 2025. The remaining SeaQuest-descended facilities now operate under different names, but the model is essentially the same. At this point, the argument for any of them staying open is hard to make with a straight face. Businesses like SeaQuest have carelessly used animals without giving a second thought to their safety for far too long, said the Humane Society of the United States in a November 2024 statement released alongside their undercover investigation findings. They were not wrong. The investigation's documented findings: roach and maggot infestations near animals and their food supply, animals kept without access to natural light or fresh air, dangerous, uncontrolled human-animal contact on a daily basis, described conditions that had persisted across multiple locations for years while regulators issued citations and the company continued operating. Over 110 USDA citations in 5 years is not a streak of bad luck. It is a management philosophy. Number 9, the Hollywood Walk of Fame. This one is tricky because the Hollywood Walk of Fame is not a ticketed attraction you sign up for. You just walk there. But that is precisely the point. Millions of tourists each year plan trips to Los Angeles specifically to visit it, and what they find is nothing like what they were expecting. The 1.3-mile stretch of Hollywood Boulevard is famous for its 2,700-plus brass stars embedded in the sidewalk, each honoring a figure from film, television, music, radio, or theater. In concept, it is a monument to American entertainment culture, a living archive of everyone who mattered to Hollywood from the silent film era onward. In practice, in recent years, it is a crumbling thoroughfare with broken streetlights, relentless street performers in threadbare superhero costumes demanding tips for photos they took without asking, aggressive souvenir vendors, and a level of accumulated grime that surprises even people who arrived with low expectations. The area has been persistently dogged by homelessness, open drug use, and associated public safety issues that the city of Los Angeles has struggled to address. Workers along the Walk of Fame have reported shootings in the surrounding blocks. 2 shootings occurred just 10 days apart at one point, one of them directly in front of the TCL Chinese Theater. Stars on the sidewalk have been regularly defaced and vandalized. Business owners in the area have described the current state of Hollywood Boulevard as horrific. Greg Donovan, known as the Hollywood Ambassador and one of the area's most recognizable longtime street figures, put it plainly to local television. It's gone from bad to worse. I hear tourists say, "It's not the Walk of Fame, it's the Walk of Shame." It's gotten that bad. Luggage storage company Stasher ranked it the worst tourist attraction in a survey comparing visitor expectations against reality. One tourist quoted by KTLA summed it up without much ambiguity. It's not clean, and everything like it appears in movies. Plans for a major renovation of Hollywood Boulevard are underway ahead of the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics. The city has proposed eliminating 2 traffic lanes along a 3.6-mile stretch of the boulevard, widening sidewalks substantially, adding bicycle lanes, and potentially moving toward a pedestrian-only zone in the densest tourist sections. The Hollywood Partnership Business Improvement District has characterized the initiative as a potential turning point for the area. That renovation is overdue by about a decade. Until it is complete and functioning, the Walk of Fame is selling a dream of Hollywood glamour and delivering a crumbling sidewalk lined with brass stars, costumed characters with complicated histories, and an aggressive commercial environment that has very little to do with the entertainment industry it is nominally celebrating. Number 8. Ripley's Believe It or Not. There are more than 30 Ripley's Believe It or Not auditoriums operating across the United States, concentrated in tourist destinations like Gatlinburg, Tennessee, St. Augustine, Florida, Niagara Falls, San Francisco, and Times Square in New York. The chain is named after Robert Ripley, a newspaper cartoonist whose syndicated column, Believe It or Not, launched in 1918 and reached approximately 80 million readers worldwide at its peak. His column documented bizarre facts, records, and human oddities from around the world, and that curiosity cabinet sensibility translated into physical museums beginning in 1933. The problem is that the world in which Ripley's made sense, a pre-internet, pre-YouTube world, where a shrunken head, or a 2-headed calf, or a man with 16 fingers genuinely could not be seen anywhere else without traveling to a specific building, has not existed for 30 years. You can now view every exhibit in every Ripley's anywhere on Earth without leaving your phone. Every strange fact, every record holder, every unusual artifact has been documented, filmed, and uploaded a dozen times over. The information asymmetry that made the auditorium model valuable has vanished completely. And yet Ripley's admission prices have risen along with tourist economy inflation, while the content of most locations has stayed essentially frozen. Reviews across locations consistently describe the same pattern. Overpriced for what is offered, exhibits that can be walked through in 20 minutes, interactive features that are broken or visibly worn, wax figures that have not aged gracefully, and a general atmosphere of novelty that has become genuinely routine. One recent reviewer of the St. Augustine location noted that the museum charges additional fees for small experiences scattered throughout the building on top of the standard admission price, nickel and diming a guest who has already paid $25 or more to walk through the door. None of this has stopped Ripley's from existing or from positioning new locations in new tourist corridors. They are very good at capturing impulse decisions from families walking past a brightly colored building. But the experience, measured against the cost, has a diminishing returns problem that more signage and an interactive phone scavenger hunt cannot fully solve. Number 7. Six Flags America. And honestly, quite a few others. Six Flags America, the chain's park in Prince George's County, Maryland, closed permanently in November 2025 after decades of operation. It closed quietly, without a formal farewell season or public acknowledgement from corporate, which is a fitting end for a park that had spent years being exactly the kind of attraction this list is about. An institution operating on momentum and brand recognition rather than a genuinely competitive experience. Six Flags and Cedar Fair completed a merger on July 1st, 2024 that created North America's largest regional theme park operator, with 41 parks across the country and a combined debt load of approximately $5.2 billion. The strategic pitch was that combining the two chains would produce operational efficiencies, eliminate redundant costs, and create a company strong enough to compete against Disney and Universal at the regional level. What it produced instead was a combined entity carrying enormous fixed costs into a year where attendance fell significantly. In the second quarter of 2025, the combined company's parks were down approximately 1.4 million visitors compared to the same period the prior year. Season pass purchases were also declining. The Six Flags side of the merger has struggled harder than the legacy Cedar Fair properties throughout the integration period. Post-merger changes included charging guests extra for specific attractions that had previously been included in general park admission, a decision that generated significant backlash from long-term season pass holders who had purchased their passes under a different value proposition. Staffing was reduced by roughly 15% across full-time roles. The guest experience at several parks deteriorated in ways that showed up in reviews and in the attendance numbers. A financial analyst commenting on the situation in September 2025 said the company would need to make major adjustments to their entire organization across all 42-plus parks, given the debt load and the revenue performance. Six Flags America was the first park to close. It is unlikely to be the last, and some of what remains in the portfolio would be better served by honest closure and community reuse than by continuing to operate under reduced investment until the math finally stops working. Number 6. The Hollywood Wax Museum, Gatlinburg, and others. Wax museums as a category have had a difficult few decades, and the Hollywood Wax Museum in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, is a useful case study in how the format struggles in the current environment. Gatlinburg sits at the gateway to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, one of the most visited national parks in the United States, drawing over 13 million visitors in recent years. The town's location means it captures an enormous volume of tourist traffic. It has responded by becoming one of the most aggressively commercial small tourist strips in America. A dense concentration of pancake houses, moonshine distilleries, escape rooms, mirror mazes, Ripley's attractions, and mini golf courses, each competing for the same pool of visitors who mostly came to see the mountains. The Hollywood Wax Museum fits into that landscape as a mid-tier attraction, asking guests to pay significant admission to view wax figures of celebrities. The gap between expectation and delivery is the consistent theme in visitor reviews. Wax figures are notoriously difficult to maintain and update. Even Madame Tussauds, the gold standard of the format with significantly larger budgets, produces figures that are only sometimes convincing. In a smaller tourist strip operation with tighter margins, aging figures deteriorate, lighting fades, and the celebrities being depicted become increasingly dated relative to whatever generation of visitors is currently walking through. The broader Gatlinburg Strip problem is that the sheer concentration of similar attractions, several of which are operated by Ripley's, which has multiple venues in the same short stretch of road, creates an experience more like a commercial gauntlet than a destination. The November 2016 wildfires that devastated parts of the area killed 14 people and destroyed thousands of structures, a genuine tragedy from which the community rebuilt with speed and resilience. The pace of commercial redevelopment since then has exceeded what many longtime residents feel serves the town or the experience of people who came to access the Smokies. The Wax Museum is a small piece of that larger picture, but it represents a broader category of attraction that charges real money for an experience most visitors do not find worth repeating. Number 5. Roadside Cub Petting Zoos. There is a category of attractions scattered across rural America, particularly along highways in states like Florida, Georgia, Missouri, and Texas, that operates under various names but shares a common business model. Privately owned tigers, lions, and other big cats kept in roadside facilities, with paying guests permitted to hold and photograph cubs for a fee. These operations appeared as curiosities for decades before the Netflix documentary Tiger King in 2020 brought them to a global audience, along with the breeding practices, welfare conditions, and regulatory gaps that allow them to exist. The Tiger King documentary was not a flattering portrait of the industry. It showed the interior of operations that claimed conservation purposes while functioning primarily as businesses generating revenue from human-animal contact with animals that were bred specifically for that purpose. The central question the documentary raised, what happens to the hundreds of tigers and lions bred to supply the cub petting pipeline once they grow too large for customers to safely hold, had an uncomfortable answer that the operations preferred not to discuss publicly. The federal Big Cat Public Safety Act, signed into law in December 2022, specifically prohibits direct public contact with big cats, including handling, petting, or feeding of cubs, and bans possession of big cats by private individuals with limited exceptions for licensed facilities. This should, in theory, have ended the cub petting model entirely at the federal level. Enforcement has been uneven, and some operations have relocated, restructured their business offerings, or found ways to operate in regulatory gray areas. The USDA, which handles licensing and inspections under the Animal Welfare Act, has finite inspection resources relative to the number of facilities operating across the country. The broader category of roadside exotic animal exhibits, facilities that may be operating within the letter of current law but bear no resemblance to accredited zoological institutions in terms of animal welfare standards, is a persistent feature of the American tourist landscape. These are not conservation facilities. They are entertainment venues using wildlife as the product. The law has moved against the worst practices. That movement is not finished. Number 4, SeaWorld. SeaWorld is a more complex case than the others on this list, and it deserves a more careful treatment. The company operates marine parks in Orlando, San Diego, and San Antonio, and has made genuine and documented efforts in recent years to transform away from the orca performances that became its defining controversy. The 2013 documentary Blackfish changed the public conversation around SeaWorld in ways the company has never fully recovered from. The film told the story of Tilikum, a captive male orca who spent most of his life at SeaWorld and was involved in the deaths of 3 people, including the death of senior trainer Dawn Brancheau in February 2010. Brancheau was killed in front of a live audience in the Shamu Stadium at SeaWorld Orlando. Tilikum died at SeaWorld in January 2017. The film's impact was substantial and sustained. Attendance at SeaWorld parks dropped sharply in the years following Blackfish's release. Corporate sponsors, including Southwest Airlines, which had been a partner for 25 years, terminated their relationships. California introduced the Orca Welfare and Safety Act, which would have banned holding orcas in captivity in the state. SeaWorld announced in 2016 that it would end its theatrical orca shows and phase out orca breeding, transitioning to what it called educational presentations. By 2019, the theatrical show format was gone. The company has also leaned heavily on its animal rescue program as evidence of its conservation mission. SeaWorld has conducted more than 40,000 animal rescues over the decades, and that work is documented and real. But in September 2024, a trainer was seriously injured while handling an orca in the medical pool at SeaWorld Orlando. The injury triggered an investigation by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. In March 2025, OSHA issued a serious citation under the General Duty Clause of the Occupational Safety and Health Act and levied a $16,550 fine. SeaWorld chose to contest the citation. Former SeaWorld trainer John Hargrove, who spent more than 14 years working with orcas at SeaWorld and later became a public critic of the parks, has argued simply that close interaction with the ocean's apex predator can never be made fully safe. The orcas currently living at SeaWorld's parks cannot be released into the ocean. They have spent their entire lives in captivity and lack the skills to survive in the wild. SeaWorld is managing a situation that will resolve itself only as the current animals age and die over decades, with no new orcas entering the parks. Whether the company deserves full closure or continued transformation is a debate that will not end quickly. What is not debated is that putting apex ocean predators in tanks for entertainment audiences was always a bad idea, and the company is now unwinding it on a very long timeline. Number 3, the Creation Museum, Petersburg, Kentucky. The Creation Museum in Petersburg, Kentucky opened in May 2007 and has drawn millions of visitors since then. It presents the biblical account of creation as literal, documented history, a young Earth approximately 6,000 years old, humans and dinosaurs coexisting in the same historical era, the Tower of Babel as a historical event, and a full-size recreation of the interior of Noah's Ark. It is operated by Answers in Genesis, a Christian apologetics organization, which also runs the Ark Encounter attraction about 45 miles away in Williamstown, Kentucky, a full-scale external recreation of Noah's Ark that opened in 2016. The specific issue with the Creation Museum, beyond the religious content itself, is the presentation format. The museum uses the visual language of legitimate natural history and science museums. Professional dioramas, exhibit signage, explanatory text placards, fossils, geological samples, and animatronic dinosaurs, while systematically contradicting the scientific consensus on the age of the universe, the age of the Earth, evolutionary biology, paleontology, and geology. The presentation is deliberately designed to look like science. The conclusions it presents are not supported by the scientific community and actively contradict what students are taught in publicly accredited educational institutions. This is not an argument about religious freedom. People are entitled to their religious beliefs, and private organizations can operate museums that present those beliefs. The objection is narrower. An institution that charges admission, markets itself using the word museum, employs the visual grammar of science education, and targets school-age children with programming while presenting content that the National Center for Science Education, the American Institute of Biological Sciences, and the broader scientific community have uniformly characterized as scientifically inaccurate. The Creation Museum is not going to close on the basis of that argument. It has a committed audience, continued financial support from its parent organization, Answers in Genesis, and full legal standing to operate. It has also expanded since opening, and the affiliated Ark Encounter in Williamstown, Kentucky, draws its own substantial visitor numbers. Placing either on a list of things that should close is not a legal argument. It is a category argument. These institutions use the visual grammar and the institutional credibility of science education to present conclusions that science does not support, marketed to adults and children who may not arrive equipped to distinguish between the two. The label of museum carries weight that these institutions are borrowing rather than earning. Number 2, any remaining wild animal circus. The traditional traveling circus featuring wild animal acts, elephants, tigers, bears performing tricks for crowds under a tent, is nearly extinct in the United States. And that is largely a good thing that arrived later than it should have. Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey, the most famous circus in American history, ran for 146 years before it retired its elephant acts in 2016 under sustained public pressure and increasing government scrutiny. It closed entirely in 2017, citing declining ticket sales and the high cost of complying with growing regulations around animal care. The company relaunched in 2023 in a new form, operating as a circus without animal acts. But traveling shows and smaller regional operations featuring wild animals in live performance still exist across the country in various forms, operating under state permits that vary enormously in what they allow and how they are enforced. Elephants trained to stand on platforms and wave their trunks. Tigers jumping through hoops on command. Bears sitting on oversized bicycles. These acts defined the American circus experience for generations, and the training methods required to produce them, methods that involve extended confinement, food deprivation, and in documented cases physical punishment, have become increasingly incompatible with public tolerance. The Association of Zoos and Aquariums, which accredits legitimate zoological institutions, does not accredit performing animal shows of this kind. State legislatures in California, New Jersey, Hawaii, Illinois, and others have passed or pursued legislation restricting or banning wild animal performances. The scientific literature on the behavioral and welfare needs of elephants, big cats, and large bears is extensive and not ambiguous about what captive performing environments provide versus what these animals require. The operators who remain in this space argue tradition, family livelihoods, and the public's right to experience these animals up close. The animal welfare community's counter-argument is that training an elephant to balance on a stool and a tiger to jump through a ring requires inflicting enough discomfort and fear to override those animals' natural resistance to doing things they would never do in the wild. That argument has been winning, and the remaining operations are simply the last to acknowledge it. Number 1, Times Square, New York City. Times Square does not have an admission fee, and it will never close. It is a public intersection, and intersections don't shut down. But it earns the top spot on this list because it is the single most aggressively marketed, most visited, and most consistently disappointing tourist destination in America. The gap between what people expect and what they get is bigger here than almost anywhere else. Times Square draws approximately 50 million visitors per year, making it one of the most visited places on the planet. What those visitors encounter is a dense, exhausting concentration of chain restaurants that exist in every other city, aggressive street performers in licensed and unlicensed character costumes who approach tourists and then demand payment for photos, a wall-to-wall assault of digital advertising that makes it impossible to look anywhere without seeing a screen, and ticket sellers for bus tours, comedy clubs, and Broadway shows that can be booked at better prices from any smartphone. The famous New Year's Eve ball drop draws enormous television audiences, but most of the people physically there spend hours standing in a cold, crowded pen with no access to bathrooms, food, or an easy exit. The costumed character performers have been a recurring public safety and nuisance issue for years. The city of New York has attempted various regulatory approaches to manage them, designating specific activity zones and requiring registration, with mixed results. Reports of harassment, aggressive solicitation, and assault involving costumed performers have been documented across multiple news investigations, and the NYPD has made arrests involving them on charges including assault and robbery. Luggage storage company Stasher's survey of tourist expectations versus reality ranked Times Square among the most disappointing landmark experiences in the country. Reviews from international visitors who traveled to New York specifically to see it routinely described the same experience: overwhelming, overpriced, and nothing like the version seen in every film set in New York City. The version in the movies is real in the same way a film set is real. The version you actually stand in smells like a food cart and has someone in an Elmo costume asking for $5. Times Square as a concept, the crossroads of the world, the theater district, the neon embodiment of American urban ambition, is genuinely something worth experiencing at least once. The energy is real. The scale is real. The sense of being at the center of something enormous is real. Times Square as a place where a family on vacation spends 2 hours and a significant amount of money and walks away feeling like New York welcomed them as guests rather than targets is a very different story from the one being marketed to them. The idea should stay. The costumed characters, the aggressive solicitation, the crumbling sidewalks, and the gap between the movie version and the lived version, all of that desperately needs a rethink that the city has been promising for years and only partially delivering. Some of these places are genuinely doing harm to animals held in conditions that no regulatory framework was designed to fully prevent, to visitors who arrive without knowing what they're walking into, or to the surrounding communities they've outgrown, commercialized, or simply exhausted. Others are doing a subtler kind of disservice, charging real money for experiences that the world has moved past, and asking visitors to pretend otherwise, or worse, to not notice. The difference in degree matters enormously. A roadside big cat facility and an aging wax museum are not the same kind of problem, but both categories are worth naming, and naming directly. America has always been very good at selling the attraction and less consistent at asking whether the attraction still makes sense. The Fairground Barker model, step right up, pay your dollar, see the world, is woven into the national character in a way that is genuinely difficult to separate from the legitimate wonder that some of these places, at their best moments in their best eras, actually delivered. The Barker moves on to the next town. The permanent venue doesn't. And eventually, the gap between what the sign promises and what is actually inside becomes large enough that someone has to say something out loud. Consider this that moment. If you liked this one, hit like and subscribe. There is a lot more where this came from, and none of it requires standing in a crowd of Elmo costumes.